One of the most important things you can do as an expat is to plan and control your expenses. Budgeting is a great habit, but budgeting and expense tracking can become tedious. If you're not organized, you can easily become frustrated and give up on the process. There's just too many ways we spend money to keep track of it all, unless you create some categories to broadly define your expenses. After nearly 3 years of tracking my expenses as an expat, I've come up with 8 categories of expenses. Just 8 numbers you need to track each month to know where your money's going and give you the levers to pull in case you need to rein in your expenses for fluctuations in income, to recoup savings after an unexpected expense, or to save for a motorbike or a trip. Here are the 8 categories I've defined. They are household, groceries and dining out, transportation, miscellaneous, support for a girlfriend or spouse, one-time expenses, and travel. Let's dive in to see what goes in each category and why. The first category is your household expenses. Household expenses are typically fixed expenses associated with your home. Your rent, electric, internet and cable, you might have a parking expense. Add the cost of data and other packages for your phone. Put in your subscriptions, Netflix, Spotify, Apple Music. These are fixed expenses. They can go in this category. And don't forget your Visa expenses. A lot of people pay Visa fees every few months. Sometimes it's a whole year at a time. And they tend to neglect that this is an expense that should be recorded against your monthly expenses. So do the division, figure out how much that costs on a monthly basis, and add it to your budget. When I was in the Philippines as an American tourist, it cost me about $450 a year for my Visa renewals and my ACR card, which is an annual fee. That $450 divided by 12 is about $37.50. So I put $38 in my budget. That way you know that money is coming out. That's what it's costing you to live every month. The next category is groceries and dining out. These 2 categories represent variable expenses, and most people who budget will break them out separately because they offer a way to adjust your spending. And the reason for that is because dining out costs about 4 times what it costs to buy groceries and prepare meals at home. For some people, groceries represent food, but to me, groceries are all the consumables you buy and bring home. That includes food, but it also can include paper towels, aluminum foil, your laundry detergent, your toiletries, soap, shampoo, toothpaste, razors. The reason I don't break them out separately is because I don't want to dissect every grocery receipt to put my food in one category, my razors and shampoo in another. That's just too much detail. Everything that comes into my house that's consumable goes into the groceries category. If I'm out and I buy a nice new bread knife or a toaster oven and I buy it at the same store, I'll subtract that off the receipt and put it into another category. For me, those represent one-time expenses. But everything that I consume, whether it's paper towels or toilet tissue, laundry detergent, those all go into this one groceries category. It keeps things simple. The dining out category includes any meals I eat in a restaurant, but also any takeout meals and any meals I order for delivery. If it's a meal prepared by someone else, then it's a dine-out meal. In this category, I would also include movie snacks. They're eaten outside the home. They're usually much more expensive, and that's really the key here. It's the cost of this food compared to food you prepare yourself at home. So if it looks like a dine-out expense, it is one. Put it in this category. And this gives you a nice lever you can pull to adjust your expenses if needed. You can pull back on dining out, eat more at home, and save a lot of money. But if you can afford it, go ahead and dine out. Your budget will tell you the answer. The next category is transportation expenses. Transportation expenses cover your expenses for getting around your town, going out in a taxi to the mall or to dinner, and can also include expenses for going on an excursion. Let's say you want to go out of town, you go hiking in the mountains, and you take a bus to get there and back. It's a day hike, it's not overnight, it's not a trip, it's not a travel, it's just an excursion, but it involves some transportation expense. Record that so you'll know how much it costs. But don't include taxis to the airport when you go on a trip. That's part of your trip expense. That's part of your travel expense. It goes in a different category. These expenses are about your normal daily life. This category should also include any expenses incurred by you for your girlfriend to come and see you and to go back home if she doesn't live with you. And the reason for that is you want your transportation expenses to reflect the total cost of moving around in your daily life. And that includes getting your girlfriend to you and getting her back home if she's not living with you. Because if you change your circumstances in the future, you move her in, you move closer together, that's going to change your transportation expense. And you want to be able to project that. Am I going to save money in this category if I make a change in my future? The same goes for buying a motorbike, for example. You buy a motorbike, now you're giving her rides back and forth, it's costing you less. So you want to record all of these expenses as they are today so that you can look and see how will things be different. Will I save money if I buy a bike or if I make another change like moving my location, like moving closer to the mall? And if you do buy that motorbike, then all the expenses associated with that bike should go under transportation costs. Your fuel costs, tune-ups, oil changes, other maintenance. The cost of the bike itself is a one-time expense. It'll go in the one-time expense category. So be sure to record all your transportation-related expenses in this category. That way you've got a lever to pull and you can project against how those expenses will change if you make a change in your life. Next up is miscellaneous expenses. This is sort of a catch-all category for things that don't really fit well in other categories. Activities like going out to a water park or renting a jet ski, going to the movies, those kinds of expenses can be put into this category. You want to track them. You want to know how much you're spending on those kinds of things. I also put health-related expenses in here, sort of health maintenance. That would be your fitness club fees, checkups, dental cleanings, any prescriptions that you have, or if you get sick and you go to the doctor. It's usually not that expensive for something that's not major. I wouldn't say that those are one-time expenses. If they're small, I'll put them into the miscellaneous because they kind of happen with some frequency. You do get sick. You do need a prescription once in a while. Put it in here. If it's a really big expense, then you're going to want to put it in one-time expenses, something that's not going to happen very often. So this category allows you to track some discretionary expenses. It gives you a lever to look at. If you want to pull back your expenses, you can look at this category and say, hey, maybe I won't go out to the movies so often. Maybe I won't go to that resort and pay the day pass. Maybe I won't go to the water park or go rent that jet ski for the weekend. And anything else that you can think of that you spend on. Some people will put something like cigarettes into a category like this. Certainly, I would put a bar tab in here because your bar tabs could skew your dining out category. It's not essential that you go out and drink. Put it over here in this category, see how much it adds up to, and then if you need to pull that lever, you can pull this lever rather than your dine out lever to reduce your expenses if needed. Let's talk about support for a girlfriend. This will depend on where you are exactly in Southeast Asia. I can tell you that in Vietnam, it's going to be different than it is, for example, in the Philippines. But let's use the Philippines for our example, because the Philippines represents a country where pretty much all of the different categories of support apply. And that begins with her personal needs. If your girl is not working, and maybe even if she is, she's not going to have a lot of extra money to provide for her own personal needs. And so a small amount of money dedicated to that, to handing her a little bit of money to go shopping for herself, to get the things that she needs in her daily life. Adding to that, you may want to provide your girl with an allowance. And if you've listened to this video so far, you know that I haven't talked about numbers. And so I'm not going to talk about numbers here either. I'll do that in a separate video. But you can arrange an allowance on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Probably it's better on a weekly basis, and you'll be able to budget that expense. And then beyond allowance comes family support. You may combine allowance and family support, just giving the girl an allowance, and then she's responsible to take some of that and give to her family. That doesn't always work out the best way because the percentages that she keeps versus gives to the family may not align with what you intend or what the family expects. So you may want to be explicit on how much support you give to the family and make sure one of her family members who's responsible in the family knows how much to expect. That way, when you give her the money to give to her family, you know the family will receive that money. If you're in a long-term relationship, a really great way to support your girlfriend is to send her to school. Education expenses in Southeast Asia are not like they are in the West. They can be quite a bit less. In the Philippines, it may cost you 20,000 pesos per semester to send your girl to college and pay all of her expenses. That's $400 for a semester. And it's a great way to ensure her future, especially if it's not guaranteed that you and she will remain together. For education expenses, which are paid per semester, break it down to a monthly expense and add it to this category. The next category is one-time expenses. The previous 6 categories covered expenses that you incur on a regular basis. Those are your living expenses that you budget for each month. This category and the next category, travel expenses, are exceptional expenses. Expenses that you don't incur on a regular basis. And they can be large expenses and some that are fairly small, like buying clothes. But I put all of those expenses in the one-time category or the travel category. And you'll want to record them and track them because you want to average these expenses out over, say, a year that you're living out here in Southeast Asia. If you buy a motorcycle, for example, a new computer or a new phone, I would put those as one-time expenses. And then after a year, when you look at your averages per month, that'll average out to something less than that big cost. If you put the entire cost into your monthly budget, it's going to blow out your budget and it won't reflect your normal monthly cost of living here. So I do a subtotal of my expenses based on the previous 6 categories, and then I add these 2 as separate categories and do a grand total, and it's more meaningful to see the average over months for the grand total than it is just to see it at any one point in time. Because in February, if you buy a motorcycle, that will make your expenses look huge for the 2 months of January and February. But over the course of that year, dividing the cost of that motorcycle by 12 months really shows how much extra your monthly expenses are when accounting for these big one-time expenses. Travel is the same way. We'll get to that next. Travel is another exceptional expense. You don't want your occasional travel expenses to skew your monthly expenses. And for me, the definition of travel expenses are those expenses uniquely associated with travel. That means your expenses for getting there and getting around, airfare, taxis, etc. Also, your lodging expenses for an Airbnb or a hotel or a hostel. I would also include the costs of excursions while you're traveling and any souvenirs you buy to bring home. But what I don't include in this category is your food expenses. Mostly when you're traveling, you're dining out, and it can be expensive. But wherever you are, you have to eat, whether you're traveling or at home. So put all your dining and food-related expenses in the categories we've already defined. Travel should just be about the extra expenses you incur while on a trip. Knowing exactly where your money is being spent is the first step in controlling your budget and reducing expenses. In the next video, we'll talk about how much of your total budget you should allocate to each category of expenses. This will show you at any income level how much you should spend on rent, on food and dining out, and where you can adjust expenses to live the lifestyle you want. So stay tuned, but in the meantime, subscribe to stay up to date on all my videos. Thanks for watching.